Well, does your mechanic communicate clearly? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Good afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to this special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. In the studio today is Tony Joe in here to take your questions. 1-877-913-5357 is the number to call, and I do have a line open. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at www.prudentmoney.com. Send a question into the Ask Bob section, and I will get that taken care of. That is all at the website, prudentmoney.com. 1-877-913-5357. Well, Tony Joe, are you getting your mic fixed up just all right there?
Hey, I'm doing the best I can. Sometimes things just need maintenance from time to time.
Yeah, just so the listeners can see what I'm seeing. Tony Joe, and I think it's been now a couple of years, brought into the studio an ESPN mic cover. So he puts it on the mic that he uses, and it looks like he's broadcasting from ESPN. And now he's just broken it.
Well, I'll fix it later. But, you know, if you've got an ESPN mic cover, you might as well put it on the only mic you have access to. Besides, someday we may discuss Cowboys, training camp,
No, we won't do that. The few listeners I have left, I want to keep them.
How can I talk sports without an ESPN mic collar?
Well, you can just pretend in your head, but don't let us know what you're thinking. 1-877-913-5357 is the number to call, and I do have a line open. I talked about this story a couple of days ago, and when I talked about it, I said that I wanted to bring it up with you and get your feedback on it, or kind of what you think that it says, that the numbers say to you.
Okay.
So many surveys that you look at are based on very, we'll say not abundant information, just very select information.
Mm-hmm.
And so the conclusion is that looking at this small sample size, this is representative of everybody.
Right. And it doesn't give you a good overall
Right. It's not
view.
that good of a process. iSeeCars.com is a free website that has, it's like an auto trader. You can go on, you can look for cars for sale. And so they get their data. They get their data from people who transactions off of the website. They find out what cars are sold for, what their people, consumers paid for them.
Real world information.
Absolutely. So they looked over 1.8 million car sales between the months between July of 2021 and July of 2022. And what they're looking for, what was the greatest price increase? And this one, number one on the list, just makes my head spin, because it's just, so you and I were joking, who pays that kind of money for this type of a car? Mm-hmm. And the answer, of course, is one who can.
Right.
So for a Porsche 911, from July 2021 to July 2022, the price difference is 43.1%, or $66,683. Now, 66 grand would buy more than a few cars. We're talking about just one car.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you can attribute that to a lot of things. That the ship sinking in the ocean, they caught on fire and lost, 250, 300 high-end 911s. I mean, you can talk about come up with a lot of different things like that. But to me, this speaks to, if you look at the rest of the top five, you're looking at the Chevrolet Corvette, a Lexus ES300H, a BMW X4, and a Jaguar. Make up your top five. And we've read these lists before, and they've always been the Honda and the Toyotas, those mid-range type good old dependable cars, not any sports cars. And so now you get this huge shift, and then you look at what was the price increase for Fort Worth. It was only 2.9%. I just find that's interesting. What it says to me, and I'm gonna get your feedback.
Okay.
What it says to me is two things: is that the wealthy are still spending money, no question, and it kind of goes back to that old adage: the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. I think we're still seeing the shrinking of the middle class. Plus, only a 2.9% increase over the past 12 months tells me that we're at probably at a topping point for the pre-owned market as far as price increases go.
Yeah, I would agree with both those points. I would also add that if you look at the price of these rather high-end cars, there's a world that exists beyond our world, and that is the affluent. It hasn't even put a dent in car sales. They have not stopped buying cars, and like you put it well, you termed it well, with the rich get richer, but, and the really affluent people don't stop buying cars just because of tough times for, I don't know about you, but people like me, where inflation is a problem and supply line shortages are a problem and all these different factors that are affecting our lives today. But the other thing I wanted to point out, Bob, was the 2.9 number in Fort Worth. It may be a topping out. It's got to top out sometime, so you could be right. But the other thing you got to look at is that people are keeping their cars and fixing them. And I'm one person that can verify that, because I see people investing way more into cars than they should, simply
Really?
because they can't afford to buy another car.
So, do you have an example of that off the top of your head?
Oh,
And
Bob,
if you don't, that's okay.
no, I do. I have several examples. People replacing engines in cars against my better guidance. We've talked about this before. You're going to put an engine in a car. You got to look at a bigger overview of the car before you decide whether it's going to be economically feasible for you to replace the engine at the cost of $8,000 or $9,000. You look at the air conditioning system, the transmission. I mean, all these things are expensive items that could go bad after you've invested $8,000. So I try to guide people, and of course, the best thing for me is to put an engine in it. Of course, that's what I do. But it might not be the best thing for them, and I try to point out things like, what if this goes bad? You've got 220,000 miles, and this transmission has never had a service. Of course, it works okay, but what if? And I try to paint this picture for them to try to make sure that if they really want to invest this money, that they know what they're doing. And I've had people think about it. I strongly suggest, after laying everything out on the table and talking to them for maybe 30 minutes, I strongly suggest you talk about it, pray about it, whatever you need to do, but don't just make up your mind right yet. You think about all the things that I said, and if you have any questions, you can call me back and we can talk some more. And they call back and they decide they're going to spend the money. Now, I nicely tried to tell them it's probably not worth it, but they're going to do it anyway, because I suspect, and I don't ask them personal things, but I suspect their financial position is such that they can't afford to replace the car. So they're kind of forced into repairing the car and taking their chances. Okay, whereas before, you repair a car, take your chances if you want to, but you didn't have to. You could just replace the car. And that's what I think is the contributing, Bob, to that 2.9 number of Fort Worth. People are just keeping their cars, spending money on them.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, if you are in the in the market for a car, a pre-owned car, let's say, you got to be so very, very, very careful. Even more, don't you think? Even more careful about the selection process
Than ever before.
and the due diligence, and the bottom line is, before the pandemic, you could decide, hey, I think I'm going to go buy a car on a whim. Not saying that's a good idea, but I'm saying you could do that. You go look at a bunch of cars. By the end of the day, you could have probably a pretty good car, whether you with whatever deal you got.
Probably so, right.
But you can't move that fast today.
No.
And nothing is demanding for you to move that fast. I wouldn't think.
No, and you're initially you're gonna make a bigger investment today, regardless, whether it's a used car or a new car, if you can get one that you like. So keep in mind that not only do you have to really be careful about selection, you have to be careful about the financial move, period, because it's going to cost 30% more than it did before.
Yeah, and of course, with interest rates up, your monthly car
That's another
payments
thing, yeah.
Are going to be a lot higher than they were when they were 3 to 4%. Things to keep in mind.
Well, unfortunately, we're in this situation now, and we've never been in this particular situation. So we have to navigate through it the best we can, make the best prudent decisions we can, get advice from everybody we can, and then formulate a decision based on that. Nobody expects more than that from people. Do the best you can, make the best decision you can, and that's good enough.
This is Bob Brooks. You are listening to the Special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. 1-877-913-5357 is the number to call. This is Bob Brooks. We're up against the break. Stick around. I'll be right back. Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern-day steward movement.
Dynamic, practical, life-changing.
There's no point in going to church and not letting the Christ who gave birth to the church on the day of Pentecost change your life.
Join us each day as Pastor Paul Shepherd applies the timeless truth of Scripture to everyday life. It's Destined for Victory on this great station.
Weekday afternoons at 3:30 here on Bible School Radio, KDKR.
Hi, I'm Jan Markell, host of Understanding the Times. We're very excited to be a part of Bible School Radio. I hope you will join me Saturday, 10 a.m., for cutting-edge guests and the latest information to help you discern the truth, even the inconvenient truth. We'll help you understand our times and contend for the faith. That's Understanding the Times, Saturday at 10 a.m., right here on Bible School Radio or anytime at olivetreeviews.org.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to this Special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. 1-877-913-5357. Well, Tony Joe was listening to the spot about the webinar next week, and he looked at me and he goes, "Do you want to know when I'm going to retire? At what age?" I said, "What's that, Tony Joe?" He said, "Probably 275." I didn't realize.
Or 300, somewhere.
300. I didn't realize that you aged like biblical.
Well, you asked
characters.
me on the seminar thing, I heard you say, what is your retirement goal age? Well, that's what I'm thinking.
For the rest of us who aren't looking at age 275, I've got a webinar for you, and it's how to create a simple retirement plan. And I've been putting, Tony Joe, I've been putting everything together for this webinar, looking at financial calculators, ones you can just pull up off the web and use to calculate retirement numbers. And it was amazing to me. I mean, I went through tons of them because I'm looking for one to use as an example in the webinar, and I couldn't find one that met my criteria. In other words, I couldn't find one that would give you a good, accurate look at what your retirement was. So I'm sitting there thinking, how do people take in this wrong information that these calculators put together? And the majority of them are there to trying to get you in as a client, open up an account, and all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
You can't even know if you can trust them to begin with. But I'm cutting through all that, making it very simple, and I've come up with the imperfect retirement plan. Imperfect.
Okay.
And it all dawned on me when I was putting all this together. And I'm going to be talking a lot about the imperfect retirement plan that would apply to the rest of us who aren't going to wait to age 275 like Tony Joe to retire. Hey, if you want to sign up for the webinar, which I would encourage you to do, I said at the beginning, if you watch only one webinar in 2022, this needs to be the one. This is the biggest problem that people have, is people have no idea, why you're saving money, what the goals are, what the end date looks like. So we're going to talk about all that. Very easy to understand. It's going to be on Wednesday, August 24th, Thursday, August 25th, and Friday, August 26th. Go to prettymoney.com and sign up today. Okay, Tony Joe, last question for you. I'd like to get your feedback.
Okay.
On the price increases on pre-owned cars. Let me give you an example. Let's say that a $30,000 car went up 30% or $9,000. Okay, such a big jump. It's highly unlikely that the car community is going to get together collectively and go, hey, I don't care if there's supply back. Surely there's people who will still buy around this percentage price increase. So my theory has been, and we've never seen this before, but my theory has been that if the price difference is 30%, you got to find what is the equilibrium that people will pay and car dealers will stop reducing at. And I think you're still going to see a 10 to 15% maybe higher price as an equilibrium than it was pre-pandemic.
Well, I'll tell you, I don't think we're seeing the end limit yet.
I'm talking about when we get to the end limit, when car dealers, I still think they're going to have a 10 to 15% buffer in their used car prices, because I just don't think it's going to all go away.
Well, kind of like the government, taxes never really come down, and
right.
You've got a good point where they've been practicing this model for so long. By the time it actually does stabilize the market, the practices have now been in play for 2, 3, 4 years. Who knows when it's going to end? So yeah, you got a good point. I mean, 15% buffer here and there. It's too bad, don't you think? I mean, it's too bad.
It's ridiculous.
It's got to be that way, but that's unfortunately human nature, and that's probably pretty accurate.
Do you remember back during the financial crisis when car dealerships were having a horrible time, selling cars?
Mm-hmm.
What they would do, Kelley Blue Book gives you a trade-in value and different levels of value, so you can rank your car,
right,
and what the appropriate dollar to spend on that used car. Dealerships got to a point, if you were going to trade in a car, you were going to pay what they would pay at an auction. And in years following the financial crisis, that they still were paying just a little bit over that auction price, even when things got back to normal.
Right.
Same kind of a deal. People don't. I think people start to forget how much cars really cost, and how less expensive they were before the pandemic.
Right.
And then that middle ground settles in.
Everything is distorted due to the confusion. And yeah, you're correct. That's exactly what happens.
Okay, I didn't mean to talk about used cars for so long, but I just find it interesting. You called me, we talked quite a few times during the week, and you were talking about how important it is that a customer and a mechanic communicate clearly, because there's obviously some real downsides. And what we always find is the similarities between what I do for a living and what you do for a living. It's the same thing goes here. It's very important to communicate clearly to your clients what you mean and what words mean, so that good decisions are made.
Right.
And you had gone over some examples with me, but let me ask you a question first before we jump into some of this. What are some red flags that a mechanic may exhibit that they just really don't have the desire to sit and take time to communicate like they should?
Well,
makes sense.
I've always believed, and here's what I've always tried to explain to people, and that is if the technician working on your car, or the service writer, or the mechanic, whoever is in charge of communicating with you, if they can't make you understand what is going on with your car, why it's doing what it's doing, and you understanding what they're telling you, then there is not a clear path of communication. You may not know anything about a car, but when the technician explains it to you, you should know exactly what's going on with this part of your car that's not working, and why it's not working, and what needs to be done to correct the problem. Bob, none of us know. We're not medical people, we're not doctors, but yet the doctor can explain things and we can kind of understand,
Right.
We may not be home builders, but the carpenter can explain why the roof is leaking, what needs to be done, and, that kind of thing. So here's my point, and that is understanding some of the terms used in communication with your technician or your mechanic or your service writer is important because of one reason. The closer you can explain what's going on with your car, and the better understanding you have between the mechanic and the client, can lead to a lot less time diagnosing the problem. This translates into money. Time is money. The less time that it takes them to figure out what's wrong with your car, the less money it's going to cost you. That's why it's important to have some kind of an understanding of what's going on and answer the questions that he needs to know.
Yeah, and I was also thinking too that what a tough situation when you got something going on with your car, you're stressed, and for us who don't know anything about cars, you're stressed that you make a mistake in telling and thoroughly explaining what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's human nature to say, okay, here's the problem, and you're stressed out and you're kind of explaining it, but you're not really explaining it very well.
Right.
And the mechanic looks you dead in the eye and goes, I understand your problem. Let me go take a look at it. When they may or they may not. But they think that they know enough to start spending your money. And then as the person who's stressed goes, oh, that feels so much better. He understands.
The other thing that goes along with that is that sometimes the mechanic, who is so mechanically minded, knows how the car works, knows everything about the car, he doesn't ask the right questions, or he may assume that if it was doing this, you would have said something. But you're not knowledgeable enough to say something about that particular problem. He just assumes that you would have said something if it was doing that.
Yeah.
And all this boils down to is when the end is near and the diagnosis is made and this part has to be replaced, and then it all makes sense. The thing I'm trying to help people with, and we'll do this from time to time to try to help, explain the terms, because the quicker you can come to this resolution, the less time he's going to spend and the less dollars you're going to spend. It's all about saving the money.
Yeah, because there's always a lot of exploratory
That's
work
right.
that goes along with it.
Cut as much out as you can and get right to the heart of the
Well, we'll
problem.
continue this discussion next week. This is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.